More variety.
We ain't running a timer here. We're mass communicating.
You're listening to Para X.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everyone, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. Tonight's opening song was Moon Chant by Marie Bruce. So why a moon chant, you ask? Well, tonight we're going to be talking to author, teacher, and astrologer Ivo Dominguez. And he's a visionary and a practitioner of a variety of esoteric disciplines. He's been active in Wicca and the Pagan community since 1978, and he's been teaching since 1982. He was a founding member of the first Coven of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, a Wiccan tradition where he currently serves as one of its elders. He's the author of several books, including Casting a Sacred Space, the core of all magical work, and he's also a professional astrologer. And tonight we're going to be talking about his latest book, hot off the presses, this month actually, Practical Astrology for Witches and Pagans. Now, if you have any questions for Ivo, please send me a private message and I'll pass it on. And if you're in the main chat room, send me a private message only because it scrolls by so quickly sometimes that I might miss it. Ivo, thank you for coming back and congratulations on another great book.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back on. It's always a lot of fun.
We're going to have some fun tonight because this is a really interesting topic, and I swear there are so many things I read in the book that I had no clue about. It was kind of very eye-opening, and then it led to 1,000 questions. So we might not have time for 1,000 questions, but we'll have time for a few.
As many as we can do.
As many as we can do, exactly. And, you know, something popped into my head immediately, even before I started reading the book. And that was the fact that we are all very much aware of the moon phases as we do our magical works. Right. We're aware of zodiac and sun signs, but I've until now never heard of anyone talking about using the other planets and the stars. Why do you think astrology hasn't been more prominent in our magical lives?
You know, I think it's a matter of coming in and out of popularity or in and out of usage in our community. And I think a bit of it is simply this. Our community has grown and expanded and changed really, really quickly over the last several decades, which is a great thing. Mm-hmm. But there's a problem with astrology in that normally it has a really long learning curve. There's just way too much to learn, to memorize, to understand before it begins to click in. Mm-hmm. So the people that are available to be teachers of astrology tend to be, few and far between because of the steep learning curve. And we've kind of outpaced the growth of the number of teachers of astrology in the community to the overall size. So that's part of it. The other thing is popularity of astrology in the mainstream community means that most of the astrologers that are out there are not magical people. And different things. Most folks, I hate to say it, but in a lot of ways, most popular astrology is basically using the heavens to take a selfie. Basically, tell me, look at my chart and tell me about me. Mm-hmm. Tell me who I am or what's going to happen next. And all that's very valid and useful. But as a result, the bulk of work has been directed in that direction. But, there's roots of magic and astrology, and actually all of us probably have grown up with finding various correspondence tables in our various books that indicate that particular plants or herbs or metals or crystals are associated with particular planetary forces or the signs. And, most times people look at those and go, oh, that's nice, and they just move right along because it doesn't mean anything. I had the really good fortune of when I was first becoming involved in magic that I had like 2 or 3 women who were actually witches and astrologers, literally living in the same county that I was in. So I kind of was blessed and took it as kind of granted that a large number of people in the magical community were aware of or used astrology in their practices much more than I discovered over the years that wasn't the case. But if you look, the farther back in time you look, the more you find reference to the stars and the planets and the signs in witchcraft and alchemy and ritual magic, you name it. But I think that we have been overwhelmed by the astrology for personal development and prediction, and the rest kind of fell by the wayside. And unless you have somebody willing to sit down and lay it out for you in a digestible way, it just doesn't get incorporated into our work.
Yeah, and so it's your aim basically to teach the core concepts of astrology so that it can be put to practical use, correct?
Absolutely. And most of my friends that were asking me to write this book made faces because usually when they think of astrology, they think of math.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my friends are fabulous with words and with images and a bunch of other things, but math is not part of their reality.
Add me to that list, please.
Well, very often spiritual people, that's not their strength.
Mm-hmm.
However, here's the thing. The problem with most of the books and teaching about astrology is that behind the lesson plan, there's the unstated or stated goal that you're going to grow up to be an astrologer, or you're going to learn how to construct charts and do readings. And you don't need to do that. I compare it to mathematics. There are very few people that have the temperament or the talent to become math majors and become, professors of mathematics. They exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, most of us need enough math so that we can muddle through our checking account and filing our taxes.
Right.
So my goal was to teach the astrology that allows you to then look at the concepts of astrology, the symbolism of astrology, what it means in the sky, what it means when it's assigned as a correspondence, and make sense of it without having to have the mathematical chops required to be a full-fledged astrologer. I hope some people will go on and do more studies, but realistically, I suspect that you probably have not made recent use of whatever trigonometry classes that you had when you were in high school.
You're kidding. I never got past basic math. I failed my algebra readiness test. Yeah. Uh-huh. There, I've made a terrible admission that I'm dumb in math. No, but it's true. It's true.
And the thing is, you don't need it to be functional in the world. But I think that we've missed out on having all the tools that astrology can provide. Mm-hmm. And the book was really written, and I apologize to all my astrologer sisters and brothers while I was writing it, and after it came out, that's like, this is not for you. This is for everyone else.
Well, it's always good to get the other... I mean, people will write something for other people, but the people that already know it still take away stuff from another book. So
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's and if they are astrologers that don't normally mix their astrology with magic, then they're going to find things that they hadn't thought of, because I've been doing this for a very long time, and the only way you discover or polish up your techniques is by doing.
Exactly.
And I'm trying to share the things that I have found useful over the years.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what you just said was kind of the best part of this whole thing, is that, I'm going to paraphrase, but even people that aren't equipped or willing to jump into astrology in general with both feet and learn all there is to know, there is still plenty that readers and practitioners can take away from this book without years of study. And I think that's the golden key right there, because I think a lot of people say, well, astrology, oh my God, it's going to take me 20 years to figure this out, and, all I know is about the moon sign and Mercury and whatever. So that kind of is the beauty of the book. Now, we spoke about the core concepts, and let's talk briefly about that. We mentioned it. Let's talk a little bit about what they are. And I was reminding myself how little time there is on radio shows. How about this? If I start the book by presenting a path working to begin to plant the seeds for how to think about astrology. And I hope people actually that buy the books will record it for themselves, use your phone, use your computer, and then play it back and listen to the path working yourself, because it makes sense visually, and once you have the visual sense of it, then it begins to click in. But I compare astrology in the book to being like language, or learning a foreign language. And, like you can think of the planets as being like nouns. You can think of aspects as being like verbs, of signs as being like adjectives and adverbs. And for people that aren't grammar geeks, don't worry, there's plenty of different descriptions. But it's basically breaking it down into, what is it that a planet represents? What is it the signs represent? What is it that houses and aspects when it gets a little bit more complicated, but still
sensible without the math represent, so that you can envision the idea of everywhere around us at all times these powers exist. I compare them a lot to the four elements because a lot of people have a concept of the elements as part of their magical work. Imagine that you expanded your palette of colors. You can think of the elements as being like different colors of paint that you dip your brush into for doing your work. Well, each of the planets is like having another set of elements that operate in a different level, describe different forces, different kinds of information, different parts of the self, because a lot of times people think of their sun sign if they know that, and perhaps their moon sign. Well, in truth, every planet is in one of the 12 signs, and each of them represents a portion of you, so that you are a small picture of the universe. You're a microcosm, so the entire universe is reflected into you when you came into being, and the chart gives you a glimpse of that. And then when you work with those powers, when you call forth fire or water or earth and air, you have to awaken them in yourself. When you work with the planetary forces, you're basically waking up each one at a time, preferably to start, each of these forces within yourself, so you can then call them or summon them or perceive when you are looking at something or experiencing the energy from something that's got a Mars quality to it or a Venus quality to it. Or if you think of the 12 signs, probably how many sets of gods and goddesses come in 12? There seem to be quite a few of those. And there's probably some good numerological and astrological reasons for that, but the 12 signs of the zodiac represent 12 different styles of human consciousness or human behavior. You can think of them as the 12 flavors of human wisdom and human folly. But so much has been poured into them by so many people over the years that the signs themselves act like gods or goddesses as a concept of this is the way that we behave in this particular manner. Is that sort of where you wanted me to go? Or
yeah,
there's just so much.
Yeah, there is so much. And, I'm probably going to be jumping around a little bit here and there as we go, but one thing that I really loved was the guided visualization of the celestial temple. And for those who may not be aware, what is the temple and what do we find once we get there through this visualization?
Well, how about this? Rather than trying to explain astrology by math or trying to explain how the planets tug on us in various ways, or as pagan folk, we know that the whole world around us is alive and connected to us. And to make an extremely compressed version of this visualization, I'm going to really simplify it. Think of the planets as being like stars or spotlights, if you prefer, if you've got a theater background, and they are radiating a particular kind of light or particular kind of energy. And each of those are different colors and different brightnesses, and they're in motion in the sky. And inside the temple, there are these 12 amazing stained glass windows that are actually the 12 signs. And when the light of the planets passes through those stained glass windows, what happens when light passes through windows that are like that? They take on additional layers of color. They also take on the shapes and the forms, the pattern that's in that sign, that stained glass window. And then it comes all the way to Earth, the physical plane, and lands on the floor of the temple. And you can imagine this beautiful inlaid circle in the floor of the temple that's actually the birth chart or the chart of what's going on in that moment. And those lights from the heavens, modified, passing through those stained glass windows, fall upon that floor, fall upon that circle in the ground of the temple. And as we know, when light hits the flat surface, depending upon its angle, it ends up being spread or transforms in shape. But that pattern that's now all the way to Earth, that's what happens when the power of the heavens, passing through these layers of influence, come all the way down and touch the Earth. And that's one way of looking at what happens when you look at the chart of a person's birth or the chart of what's going on this moment. Basically, the power of the planets, it's unique, has been modified by the stained glass and then modified yet again by how it's projected onto the physical plane. It's a lot prettier and a lot longer. as a visualization, but it gets the idea across.
Yeah.
And that's why we can say that, the planet remains itself no matter what. The same way that spotlight or that huge celestial ball of beauty that's radiating out energy of every kind is then passing through the sign, which modifies it even more. Which means every planet is potentially, depending on what your chart looks like, could be in any of those signs. And every 2.5 days, the moon passes roughly through one of those signs, and that has an impact on the whole world in addition to its phase.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've got a question from the chat room.
Yeah.
It deals with the time. It deals with the timing of planets at angles for ritual and candle magic. She said, for instance, Venus transits for money, love, and luck, transiting into the money house. But the question is, are there times when not to attempt rituals and spell work, astrologically?
Sure. Though I'm going to give you a slippery answer because everything is context and purpose related and intent related. Mm-hmm. So if you were, I often compare it to, I live near the ocean, so the tides are a big deal. And they're very different in each location as to when the high tide is happening, when the low tide is happening, when it's coming in, when it's coming out. And also that slack tide when it's kind of confused and coming in and out at the same time. Mm-hmm. And depending upon what you're trying to do, you pick the tide that works. You've probably, there's a ton of rules that you will find about if you are trying to do the following thing, don't do this during the following aspects or during the following time. And here's what I'm going to say. My goal is that you learn enough of what each of the powers mean, if you want to think of it that way, so that you can figure out a creative way to do your spell or your working whenever you need to. And there's actually a chapter in the book about choosing when to do things. Mm-hmm. And there's also a chapter in the book about how to adapt to what is, because sometimes we don't necessarily have the choice. Mm-hmm. And there are things that are apparently bad, but depending upon what you're trying to do, can be quite good. Are you attracting money, or are you trying to avoid accruing additional debts and expenses? That change of that perspective of how you do the work can change when you would do it as well. So there's no hard and fast rules. And if anybody tells you that there's only one way to make things work, they probably lack imagination. There are times when anybody with any sense will say, let's wait till tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Or let's wait another day. But it's easy to fall into the trap of waiting for the perfect moment, which means that you might delay your actions for days or weeks or months or years, and that's not necessarily useful because a lot of things in life is time limited. Here's a better way of thinking. A lot of times people think of Venus as being abundance, which it is. Mm-hmm. But then depending upon which sign it happens to be in, that also adjusts what flavor of abundance. But let's look at let's call it mining for gold, since we're talking about money. Mm-hmm. And in some places in the world, you can walk into a cave and use your flashlight, and if you look carefully, you'll see thin veins of pure gold in the walls of the cave. Mm-hmm. And you can chip those out, or silver, or whatever, and they eventually end up in the river anyway. Yeah. But it's pure and concentrated. Think of that, finding the vein of gold or silver is like waiting until everything has lined up in the heavens and the planets are in a way that they've concentrated that power and that energy and refined it for you. Most gold mines, they take out a big block of stone and pound it up and heat it, and then by refining it, they melt the ounce of gold that you can't see out of that big pile of rock. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that all of the planets are active in any moment. The times that are viewed as the most favorable for specific activities are when we have lined things up so that they're concentrated. Mm-hmm. But you could do other things. I mean, you could wait for a particular Venus aspect in the heavens, though. The minute I'm talking about aspects, we've jumped forward a little bit in terms of levels of complexity. Mm-hmm. How many of you out in the audience, probably quite a few, have done 7-day candles or 7-day rituals?
I would think
fairly common.
Yeah.
Fairly common?
Absolutely.
Okay. A lot of 7-day rituals are cheating, and it's a very good idea. How come? Each of the 7 days of the week is ruled by one of the 7 elder planets, one of the 7 planets that the ancients could see. Mm-hmm. And by doing the same ritual or building it over the course of 7 days, you've ensured that you've worked under the influence of each of the 7 planets, so you've covered all your bases.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, and that, once again, it's about collecting it over time as opposed to having the exact moment. I mean, there's some things like moon void of course, which is something that I talk about in the book as well and shows up in every astrological calendar out there. And some people will say, oh, don't do anything during the moon void of course. Really? What if you want to sign a piece of paper that you don't want it to come to naught?
Mm-hmm.
If you are trying to drop a little note someplace at work to complain about unfair practices and are doing it anonymously, and you want to make sure you don't want to get caught, you do it when the moon is void of course. Now, you wouldn't want to sign your contract for buying a house that day or that hour, because you're asking for things to be muddled and confused. But there are other times when that being muddled or confused is actually to your benefit. It's great for doing time magic because the laws of time are a little bit bent, a little bit loosened. So there's use for everything. And once again, you can, in the same way that you've probably got a whole bag of tricks for how to work with the phases of the moon when it's not what you want it to be for that particular thing, and you figure out a way to work with it. The same is true for all the planetary powers. And if you are really, really bent on making sure you get everything right, then be patient, because sometimes you're lucky and it's going to be soon, and sometimes you're going to be waiting a while until all the circles in the heavens click to the right position to line up completely for what you desire.
That makes sense. It's all starting to
click in.
Starting to click in. Yeah. I was talking to Ceiling Cat, who's in the chat room. She is very savvy about astrology and stuff. And so, we were talking today, and I was saying, well, when she was talking about times for rituals and maybe things to do it then and not, and I've said, well, okay, I'm a solitary practitioner, but what about people in covens? And we had this discussion. It may be a good day for 3 or 4 people in the coven, and it may be a lousy day. Right. So, I mean, how do you do that? Would everybody consult their chart first? And of course, the coven has a chart as well. I mean, that gets a little. Yeah, the coven has a chart, and all the covens in our tradition have their birth chart information, and actually all our initiations are take into consideration what's going on in the person's chart to pick the date. And that gives you a clue. When somebody's being initiated, who is the most important in the room? Person in the room? The person being initiated. So it has to work for them, and everybody else just has to suck it up and make it cope. I mean, really. So it becomes a question of what is the purpose of the ritual at hand, and what is it that's being done, and for whom? If you're doing a working because somebody is getting a healing, or somebody's needing to look for a new job, or they're looking for a new place to live, or whatever, then their chart might take precedence over other people's if that's what you're doing. But I always recommend if you're doing group work, work with the sign of the moon as your primary guide. Because regardless of who you are, you will feel it. And if you think of the moon as being, all right, and I've used this example so many times, I'm going to try to leave some details because we could turn into a long story. But have you ever been in a ritual where there is a really good drummer, and how long is it before everybody isn't just tapping their foot a little bit or moving their head a little bit, or if you're listening to music as a group, even if it's quiet in the background, we are entrained so that over time we come into sync when we hear a rhythm that is in the background or louder still.
Think of the moon as being the giant drummer in the heavens. And think of each of the signs as being a unique rhythm that calls that particular pattern out. So that on any given day, whatever sign the moon is in, that pattern is reverberating in the background of everybody's psyche, regardless of what else may be going on in their personal charts or in their life. So often, what I'll say is if you're going to be gathering together to do a class or a discussion or a ritual or whatever, pay close mind to that, because on the day that the moon is in Taurus, everybody is likely to act in group work or collective work with a Taurus bent, or a Pisces, or a Libra. Whatever the sign of the moon, people are like, for example, Cancer moon might be a very bad time to decide to have that really hard talk with somebody about all the things that they do wrong. Because the Cancer energy is going to encourage them to be more likely to be hurt by it in a very significant way. And probably not the best day to do that, but it would be a great day to do a healing ritual for the heart, or a day to do a house blessing. So that you look at the largest things, because those affect all of us. Mind you, it's filtered through who we are and whatever else is going on in our life. But if all you do is pay attention to the sign of the moon, and whether it's waxing or waning at the full or the dark, that alone changes what you do. Or if you're stuck and you're trying to figure out, well, what do we want to do, or what do I want to do, if you're a solo practitioner on that particular day for my meditation or for my ritual or for my working, then let yourself be inspired by the sign that the moon is in, because those are the sorts of things that are most easily drawn out. We say as witches we're supposed to work with the universe. Well, okay, that's what the universe is serving that night, so figure out a way to make use of that ingredient.
Good point. Good, easy way to understand it, too. Got another question from chat. Aria wants to know the best times to do healing magic rituals. Anything to do with healing, or time to avoid, depending on...
Well, all right. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So let me give you an example. The nature of the illness or the problem determines how you should make use of the astrology. So for example, let's say somebody has, I'm going to use a fairly mundane example. I, not that long ago, saw somebody, have you ever moved a ton of firewood and gotten tired and not paid attention and ended up dropping some on you? It's not fun. So of course, if you're surrounded by a bunch of witches, everybody's out there. Oh, I can help. I can heal. And the person whose hand was rather inflamed because of the logs that fell on top of it was actually getting worse, because they were actually putting more and more energy into it, and it was getting more and more inflamed because they were trying to push healing energy into it rather than trying to drain off the energy that was blocked because of the blow that the hand had received.
Makes sense.
So, right? And when we think about things like, and there's a difference between how you treat chronic conditions like arthritis or diabetes, and how you treat something that is an injury that's acute and of the moment, or how you work with somebody that's if somebody is engaging in their battle against cancer with chemotherapy or radiation. It may be that rather than fighting the cancer, your ritual is best suited to supporting their healthy tissue to regrow and to stay strong and build up their appetite, et cetera, et cetera. So figure out first, what is the nature of the illness and what is the nature of the intervention that you wish to apply. And then you start looking and it's like, okay, does this make me think more? Is the biggest problem right now inflammation? Is the biggest problem right now the person is feeling despair? Figure out what it is that you're going to tackle, and then that begins to narrow down which planets, which signs, which aspects if you're getting to one more step of complexity. So when is it the wrong time to do something? When it actually works against whatever it is that your intervention is that you've decided to try for. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you are trying to, and by the way, all the signs are good and all the signs suck.
Okay.
I'm just going to repeat that. All the signs are good and all the signs suck. They are each of the signs contains the full range of human possibility. With me so far?
Yep.
So when you're trying to think about this, you're going to come up with negative and positive things for all of them. So, for example, Saturn and Capricorn are associated with structure very strongly. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is trying to get a bone to mend, which has been very slow to heal or slow to mend, then Saturn energy and Capricorn energy might be exactly the right thing to strive for, or pick times when Saturn is in a good aspect, or the moon's in Capricorn, preferably waxing if you're trying to build bone tissue. And that would be the right time for that. But Saturn and Capricorn would also be the wrong kind of energy to call forth if the person is feeling pessimistic. Mm-hmm. Because there's an inclination in the Saturn energy and in the Capricorn energy to find the things that can go wrong. Mm-hmm. So I wish that there were things that were absolutes, but it really is. How about this? We have to get the modern medicine idea out of our head, and we have to keep the good parts of scientific method, but be mindful of the fact that most of the best healing that I've seen has been a combination of what the person knew about their healing modality and about the illness and about interventions, and then something that came out of their gut because they knew the things well enough to be inspired about what would work best for this person in this moment. Mm-hmm. So my goal with this book, by the way, besides just getting more people to learn about astrology, is that if you actually know what the signs are, and you know what the planets are and all the other bits and bobs that are in astrology, then you can improvise and know in the moment what it is, as opposed to following formulas that work most of the time, but not necessarily. Like most herbal remedies, there's some things, make yourself a cup of chamomile tea to calm down, but the right soothing tea for that person may be something that is a strange combination of things that you didn't find as a pre-made recipe anywhere.
Right. Good analogy. Got another question from chat from Mac
Sure.
Magic. He says, I don't know the hour of my birth and have always shied away from astrology. How important is it for me to know the exact time of birth?
Well, the better. How about this? It's very important to know it, and it's no sweat. Here are a couple of things. I've had a number of people come to me and say, the best I know is that I was born sometime between 8 a.m. and 1 in the afternoon based on family all disagreeing. Okay. In the old days, it was a pain in the butt because I remember when I had to get pen and paper and calculator and crank to create a chart. And now all I have to do is plug in the numbers on my iPad and voila. So in the modern era, if somebody says, I don't know the time, then I think nothing of running, 15, 20 charts, each 10 minutes apart, 15 minutes apart, whatever I need to cover the time. Mm-hmm. And then I ask, the person a couple of questions like, tell me when you had your heart first broken by somebody that you loved. When was it? If they're old enough, when did you have your first child, or your first marriage, or what was a huge life-changing event in your life? And you write down like 3 or 4 things. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the charts and say, did this happen when you were 20? Did this happen when you were 12? And you can basically begin to lock it in. It's not that different than when you're at the ophthalmologist or optometrist and they're clicking the little things back and forth until you can see. Mm-hmm. And then finally, out of the pile of 10 or 20 charts, I narrow it down to 2 or 3, ask a few more questions, and then we go, I'm pretty sure that it's going to be somewhere within this range, and we're going to use this as your chart. It's called rectification. where you basically use the person's life events and a general sense of when to narrow it down and go, aha, this is, we got it. And then you ask things like, well, that can't be right because that's the wrong rising. Ascendant or rising is the mask that you present to the world, the way the world sees you, and also the way that the world enters into you, because you're looking through it. And so anyway, there are ways to find that out. But even if you did not know that, there are still some really important things. All the slow-moving planets are going to be roughly in the same place. The moon moves pretty fast through the chart. Mercury moves pretty fast through the chart. But if you've narrowed it down to the day, then all the big, slow-moving heavy hitters in your chart are going to be known. And that may not be enough for, split-second prediction about, what's going to happen 6 months from now. But it'll give you big clues about major turning points in your life nonetheless. So, yeah, it's better to have exact time, but even in the absence of that, I once, when I was young and impetuous and really hot and excited about astrology, and I think I was somewhere in my 20s, somebody says, oh, I don't believe in this stuff. And so I asked her, well, what's your birthday? And she gave me her birthday. And I just, quickly on a pad and paper just drew up a quick chart and said, well, these things have to be true based on that date. I don't know the small details. And then I just started telling her about herself based on what could be gleaned just from knowing where her outer planets were and up to about Jupiter. And her face fell, and I didn't notice because I was too excited, and I kept talking until finally one of her friends grabbed me and shook my shoulder and said, stop, because you shouldn't scare the mundanes.
I like that.
Because pretty much, I'd told her a lot of things which I had no knowledge of because I just met her. And they were obvious based on those major things in her chart. So, yeah, but don't give up. If you don't know what the time is, a couple of friends or an astrologer and a laptop or an app will find your way to what your actual birth time was.
Okay. Now, somebody just wrote me in private chat, and they said anyone can have a chart made up for them. They're kind of like a guide for everybody to use. And I said, well, yeah, anybody can have a chart made up, typing in. But it's just that we can't do it ourselves that easily. I mean, those that don't know. So he said, well, he probably has the wrong idea of what a chart is. And that is kind of a good point. What is a chart exactly? Because there are obviously people that aren't sure. I mean, they know what it is, but they don't know what they're for, what to do with them. So that might be a good topic to address right now.
Well, and most times when people think of say chart, what they really mean is a natal chart or a birth chart.
Right. Which
is basically the chart that shows what the sky looked like when you were born. And by the way, when you look at a birth chart, it really is the whole sphere of the sky. It's kind of like you took when you look at flat maps, they're quite different than looking at a globe of the Earth. Yes. Well, a chart basically is you've taken the sphere of the visible heavens around us and flattened us into that circle, because the chart shows you not just the things that were in the sky above you, but the things that were directly under your feet on the other side of the world, on the sky that you can't see. It's basically a 3D thing that's been flattened. One way of looking at your chart is that your chart is your spiritual DNA. It's like you just had your little cheek swab and sent it off to one of those ancestry places or 23andMe or whatever, and you've gotten your printout that shows you, oh, these are the things, these are the percentages of things that are in you, and they're in this order, and maybe we can make these guesses. And I'm going to compare it to DNA, and I'm also going to compare it to a very old technology called vinyl LPs. Do you remember?
Yes, I do, and I hate to admit it, but yeah.
Yeah. And so when I was a kid, I had an old close and play record player, and for the uninitiated, that was the iPod of the era. Right. And you base right. So basically, you drag this little, or the hipsters like them too, and you would put a record on it, and down goes the lid, and it would play music. and it sounded like crap, and sometimes you'd have to put pennies or nickels on top of the needle so it wouldn't bounce and jump off of it. But if you took the same record and put it onto an amazing audiophile system with the best everything, or even if you don't know what I'm talking about with records, imagine the difference between listening to an MP3 with the cheap little earbuds you bought in the convenience aisle of your grocery store as opposed to, Dr. Dre's Beats headphones.
There you go.
When you play the record or the MP3 file on cheap playback equipment, you don't hear all the instruments, you don't hear the stereo effects, you don't hear the little squeak of somebody's finger on the guitar string, or the little breath and catch in somebody's voice when they're singing. When it's playing on a good system, you hear absolutely everything and more, and it doesn't even sound like the same piece of music. Mm-hmm. The birth chart, like your DNA, gives you the score, but it does not say anything about how you will play it back. Mm-hmm. The quality of the soul, the spirit, the individual, and what they choose to do in playing back that MP3 file, that record file, is up to them. So the chart is the piece of music that is used, as if you want to describe it that way. But what it sounds like can be radically different depending upon how good you get at using it. Oh, and there's other things. If there are things that you don't like in your chart, in the same way you can look at your DNA and go, crap, I'm going to have to be careful with this, and this. Mm-hmm. Well, in the same way that we can make life choices to, avoid problems that are inherited or that tend to run in the family, mm-hmm. we can make life choices when we look at our charts to say, I'm going to turn this into that. So, for example, in my birth chart, there is a huge propensity. People look at it and go, my God, how many people has he killed? Because there's stuff in my chart that says, oh, this guy's got to have anger issues. Well, I do, and I've had them since I was a kid. But most people that have known me as an adult, say, oh, I don't think I've ever seen him lose his temper. Mm-hmm. Because I dare not.
Right.
And that energy gets converted into being really passionate and really persistent and really fighting hard for the issues that matter to me, so that it's been transformed into something else. Like I said, all the signs are both good and bad. Well, all the planets are good and bad too. And if you've got this huge, crunchy, messy, aggravated Mars and Uranus thing going on in your chart, you can turn that into punching a hole through the wall, or you can turn it into, I'm going to move through my life and do everything that I set out to do. Mm-hmm. It's your choice. So the chart doesn't rule your life, but in the same way that your DNA doesn't rule your life or your childhood history or whatever, but it gives you big clues about what the built-in features and flaws are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's a handy way to get those things pointed out and give us an awareness, because as you said, they can be that anger can be channeled into something else, or that addictive personality can be addictive in a good way rather than a bad way. So it really is important, I think, to have a chart to understand. Yeah, to understand who you are and what you could do with it and where you can go with it, basically.
Yeah. And as magical people, the more here's the other reason to become more conversant in the principles of astrology is the more it gives us a better way of describing stuff. We often lack the words for describing energies or experiences of the magical or spiritual sort. Mm-hmm. And this is, a spiritual language. When you think about, when you actually get to know layer upon layer of what each of the planets or signs or other things that are going on in astrology mean, it works its way into your thought process, and it works its way into your way of living, so that, a lot of times I'll be reminding myself in my head, oh, I need to be more Jupiter on that one, or I need to be, and it's shorthand for a whole set of things about how I need to alter my behavior or my actions. Mm-hmm. So in the same way that when people learn tarot or runes or whatever, they start seeing them everywhere. Mm-hmm. Same happens when you learn astrology. You start seeing the patterns of, or the symbols of, or the meaning of it in your life and in the world all around you.
Exactly. And I mean, there's just so many aspects. It's kind of like layer upon layer and stuff, but it's probably a lot easier than it sounds, in a sense.
It is. It is.
It is. Okay. Got another question that I have no idea what this means from chat, and we're running short of time, so I'm trying to get in the questions. She said to ask you about the stelliums and working that element.
Working with stelliums. Well, okay. I don't know what the rest of the question is, but a stellium is when you have a large concentration of planets in the same sign close to each other in a chart. Mm-hmm. So, for example, sometimes the planets are all spread out all over the place in a chart, and sometimes it looks like it's a locomotive pulling the cars behind it. They're all clumped up together. Mm-hmm. Well, if somebody has a stellium in their chart, or if it's happening in the heavens and affecting all of us, that means they have a huge quantity of whatever that sign is, or a big portion of their personality is focused in the particular style of being that's that sign, or the houses that stellium is in or crosses. Now, good news, bad news. If you have a lot of that power, then you can be really focused in whatever that arena of life or whatever that style of approaching the world is. But it also means that everything else you have to work a little bit harder at to get or understand. In other words, it is if your planets are spread out all over the place, think of each of them as being a part of you, and it experiences a different climate or a different country or a different language or a different perspective, and that allows you to have greater breadth of understanding. Mm-hmm. But when they're clumped together, you have to, by conscious effort or by will, learn about how others feel and think about things, because what is immediately in your natural response is more focused, but focused also means narrow.
Mm-hmm. True. The
good news is, when you see in any chart, and I'll be real quick because I know we're running out of time, where you see planets in your chart, in a particular house, in a particular sign, wherever they are, those are the required courses in the major that you call your life. Mm-hmm. The houses that are empty is no such thing. There's no such thing as empty. The houses that are empty, the places in your chart that look empty, is where you have the most free will. But nothing happens there unless you make it happen. Mm-hmm. So those are like the electives or the fun courses that you take in this journey called life, or this university called life. But so you have to pay attention to the blank places as being your places that are potentially joy and accountability, though.
It's good to know. I mean, some people will be happy to know that there are such places of joy, rather than being Chicken Little and the sky falling down on everybody all the time.
Absolutely.
There was so much I wanted to get into, and obviously we don't have a whole lot of time. But so basically, if somebody is really interested in learning astrology for spell work and rituals and all that, what would you say they're going to take away from that's going to enhance the process so much more?
Start paying attention. Get an astrological calendar, either buy one or go online, and start paying attention to how you feel every day as the moon moves from one sign to another. Begin to add a planet at a time to see how you react, so that, in other words, attune yourself to the flow of energy that's around you already, and use these as guideposts so that you can connect, when I feel like that, this is what it is. And sure, buy my book if you want, and buy any other astrology books that you like as well. But honestly, the first step is simply to start in the same way that I said, I live near the ocean, so the tides are important. You learn the tides and what they do by watching them. You learn about the flux and flow of the power of the sky around us by paying attention to what's going on in your life and what you're feeling, and then seeing, this is what's going on that day, or what. And you can either do it before or you do it at the end of the day. Go, oh wow, it matched.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody wanted to have a chart made, it's kind of like going to a medium in a sense. You don't want to go to just anybody, correct?
No, and that's what I'm going to suggest is ask around. There's usually somebody in your community that is an astrologer that knows an astrologer, or hunt around the internet. But if you hunt around the internet, go to places like like the Mountain Astrologer is an astrology magazine that's pretty well known. Hexagon is another. Look at the magazines or websites that astrologers visit, and look at the ads for who's looking for clients there, as opposed to just hunting for a website and finding, oh, they're an astrologer and they say that they're the Grand Poobah from Atlantis. You know, so if you go to the places that astrologers hang out online or in magazines and look at their classified ads, or which conferences and who's teaching at a conference, you're going to find actually legitimate astrologers. Does that make sense?
It does, and I really do think it's important that everybody at some point have a chart, because it's a map. It helps. It's not only in magical workings and everything, but in life, just period. Yeah. And we've got a couple of people in chat who are recommending people that we know who can make up charts. So this is good. This is good. Before we leave, really quickly, last time you were with us, changing the subject for a minute, we talked about the new Alexandrian Library.
The Alexandrian Library, and yeah, it's done in the sense that it's physically built. It's full of books on the shelves, and right now we have volunteers that are slowly but surely scanning, entering things into the computer system, cataloging. I think we're at about 12% done in terms of cataloging the books. Mm. We have tens of thousands of books, and it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and we hope sometime by the summer to at least be able to put up the connection online so people will be able to search to see what holdings the library has. And sometime this year we'll have regular office hours, if you will, staffed by volunteers, so people can come in, do research at the library, or we have a small selection of things that are also can leave the library, and also we'll do interlibrary loans. So right now, the second and probably hardest part is actually organizing and cataloging all the wonderful things we have, having accomplished the building of it and getting all the shelves and books and materials.
Yeah, that's a fascinating place. I got one more quick question, and I think it's germane. Sure. I think we need to talk about it. He said, if somebody does a chart for you, is there a website that breaks down all the symbols, what they mean, how to interpret it? He said he's had a chart done, and it looks like somebody had a lot of fun with a protractor and a ruler. So, if you just Google, AstroDean store. Free astrological charts. There are a dozen places where you can plug in your own numbers, your own date and time and whatever, and actually see it on the screen and see if it matches what somebody did for you, for one. Mm-hmm. But if you just believe me, there are so many articles available at astrology websites. As long as they don't look like I hate to put it, as long as they don't look like the tarot reader off the major highway kind of website. Mm-hmm. Then you're probably fine, and you'll find article upon article about this is what it means when Jupiter is in Pisces. This is what it means so that you'll get a breakdown of each planet and what it means when it's in a particular sign and what it means when it's in a particular house. And you'll be guided through a lot of it. Though I will tell you that in the end, the value in having somebody who is already conversant in this helping you out is good. It falls into the same category as buying a tarot deck, laying out the cards, and trying to do a reading by flipping through the tiny little booklet that came with the deck. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not that you might not get something useful out of it, but it's going to lack some flow, and it's going to lack some nuances and sophistication. Yeah, exactly.
Because it's about how you tie it together.
Right. All right, one more quick thing. Tell everybody where they can find out more about your books, your coming events, website, all that good stuff. If you have a local bookstore, I always recommend support your local bookstore. If you want to find me online, it's ivodominguezjr.com.
and it has a list of where I'm teaching next, which events I'm going to. And, like I said, buy local first. If you absolutely have no other choice, then, buy through the mail or buy online. But remember, if you don't support your local people, we lose important resources because they will eventually vanish.
Exactly. I'm all for that.
Yes.
We have to support each other and not, get everybody else rich. It's pretty much the end of it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. I mean, we touched it. Hardly got into it at all. So many things to talk about. We may have to redo this and pick up where we left off at another time.
That would be fair.
Because it's fantastic. It's interesting. And I appreciate you explaining it in such a way that it does make sense. So anybody that's kind of afraid of astrology listens to you, and it's like, hey, it's not that tough.
And you can do this.
Yes, exactly. All right. So thank you again. Thank everybody for listening in and all these great questions that were sent in. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.